Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Full Quota podcast. My name is Mpho and Tim. I've got Tim Dale here with me. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing well, mate. I'm doing well. This is not a political podcast, but it is elections over here in SA. So that's where my focus has been over the last 24 hours. But
Yes,
moving on to the proper stuff, the proper stuff,
it's
the
not
cricket.
cricket
All good,
politics.
all good.
So unfortunately, it's not. But this is a cricket podcast. It is World Cup time here in South Africa. Well, around the world, we are descending on the Caribbean, the West Indies, and the USA, which we think is the new frontier for cricket. 20 teams are there. One of the largest World Cups we're having. Five team groups, and we've got a mixture of associate nations. We've got a mixture of the test playing nations. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And we're going to give you the South African perspective, but the South African perspective from the eyes of everybody else. We always like to do this on Full Quota Podcast. We like to talk to people from other countries that we're going to be facing at this World Cup. So we've got Sri Lanka lined up, which is probably what we're going to be talking about today with Estelle, as you can see in the heading. We're also going to talk Bangladesh. We're trying to find someone from Nepal. So if you know somebody from Nepal, please let us know that you want us to talk to. Or Andrew, if you are available and watching this, we'd love to have you on just to talk about your time in Nepal and what that team looks like. And then obviously we'll be hopefully talking to someone from the Netherlands. Hopefully it's Bertus, because we love Bertus. So we're bringing back the band. We're bringing back the family, the Full Quota family. We're doing that. But before we do anything, please do follow us, like that strapline says, on X. Please subscribe to the One World Sports Radio channel, and also follow the Full Quota podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We're going to download this afterwards, and we're going to put it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for those who may have missed it, right? Or if you want to go back on Monday and be like, who's this person? Estelle said about this person. What did Estelle say about so and so? That's essentially what we want. But we're growing the community. That's great. And so we're ready to bring her on. But most importantly, just remember, like, subscribe, and follow on those platforms as well. Okay, Tim, it's World Cup time. We've got Sri Lanka up first on Monday night or Tuesday morning, depending on where you are in the world. Your initial thoughts, and then we can go to Estelle.
Apprehensive, if I'm honest, particularly on those what is likely to be a slower, lower wicket, which would help the Sri Lankan spinners. So apprehensive, if I'm honest. I can't specify enough. From a South African perspective, it's vital they win. It really is for what the group is, for confidence and everything. I'm a little bit apprehensive about the fixture.
Cool. I'm also where you are, but you gotta trust Rob. But let's listen to who our opponents are going to be doing, who they are, and what they are. So let's bring Estelle in. Estelle, hi. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
We're doing really, really amazing. Where are you right now in the world?
I'm in Sri Lanka.
Okay, so no plans to get across to the other side of the world.
No, unfortunately, not this time. But yeah, looking forward to watching the games from here.
Okay, that's awesome. Estelle, I think we do these podcasts every time we play Sri Lanka and everything else, and there's always a thread and like a question where I will be like, okay, the last time we spoke, what's happened? So last time we spoke was the World Cup, the ODI World Cup, and I know this is a T20 show, but since the last T20 World Cup, how has Sri Lanka been working towards this World Cup, and what has happened? Obviously, the main part of it was Sri Lanka did have in the ODIs, they weren't doing that well. In the test, they also weren't doing that well. But in the T20s, you kind of kept going, and you could see with the proliferation of more players in the IPL that Sri Lanka was on some sort of a track and to being like a dark horse in this World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you rightly mentioned, in ODI cricket and Test cricket, they haven't had a great time. I wouldn't say they've had very successful 12 months in T20 cricket either, but they've kind of been 50-50. I think more than anything, success has come to individuals, and that might be important going into this tournament. Like you mentioned, the IPL had 6 Sri Lankan bowlers signed up, 6 of them who've made it to the World Cup squad. I know some of them couldn't play due to injuries, but that's a massive boost to the Sri Lankan bowling attack, because that hasn't been the case in the previous years, right? Um, at the same time, the batting, even though they struggled in the ODI World Cup, we saw glimpses of what those batters can do. I think you guys probably remember Kusal Mendis against South Africa chasing 400. Just,
Mm.
I mean, I don't think at any point South Africa was
Unfortunately,
afraid was afraid of losing that game, but he did put up a good fight. And similarly, guys like Patham Nissanka, Charit Asalanka have been in good form. So even though the successors haven't really come as a team, and Sri Lanka have only played opposition like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and haven't really tested themselves against the major cricketing nations, or nations going in to this tournament as kind of the favorites. Individually, they've seen a lot of success over the last 12 months.
yeah, I think you're right, particularly with that bowling department. That bowling department, if I was to be a neutral, really does excite me, particularly on what we think are going to be slightly slower, lower wickets than what, from a South African perspective, we are used to. Um, Taking a look at your squad, I don't see any major surprises, any major misses within that squad. Is that true, or what is your overall thought of the squad as a whole?
Yeah, I think you're right, Tim, because if you look at the 15 that have been picked, it's it's the guys that have been in and out of the side over the last 12 to 14 months, guys who have got a lot of game time, except for one name. I think if you look at Dunit Vellalage, he's yet to make his T20 debut, although we've seen a bit of him in ODI cricket, and he's
Mm.
managed to kind of shine in a couple of games. We haven't seen him in T20 cricket, so that was a bit of a surprise to see him in the squad despite him not making his debut yet. And another one I would say is probably Dhananjay De Silva. I know he's a familiar name, but there was also a thought that he may have, with the new selection committee coming in, he may have kind of lost favor in that they identified that his position in the team can be filled by somebody else. But he's also managed to make it into the side, and I think a lot of that has to do with the conditions, as you mentioned, which are expected to be a lot slower than what we've seen in the recent past in cricket. Like, I mean, if you're thinking most recently, everyone was watching the IPL where
Mm.
a lot of the scores were 220 plus, right? And you're not expecting that kind of run spree in the World Cup. Sure, there may be a couple of games where you see those scores, but you don't expect it to be a consistent run where you're getting over 200 runs. So I think those things have contributed. I think back home, the biggest gripe for a lot of fans was that Bhanuka Rajapaksha hasn't been picked.
Mm.
Um, he is, I mean, if you look at the Sri Lankan lineup, you would see power hitting has always been an issue, right? If you even go back to maybe a World Cup ago or the one before that, power hitting has always been an issue, particularly in the middle order. And Bhanuka Rajapaksha is one guy who's shown that he's capable of doing that and playing that role. Unfortunately, he hasn't kind of been in the conversation over the last 12 months. He hasn't played much cricket. I believe he was at the SA20, but got just 1 or 2 games. He was at the ILT20, didn't get too much game time there as well. So he's one that a lot of people were unhappy about not being picked, but it doesn't really come as a surprise if you look at how he's gone over the 12 months. But I think you were right, Tim, in saying that no major surprises or major omissions from the 15-man squad.
Yeah, and not necessarily major surprises, but I look at the squad and I look at the options that one Hasaranga has as captain from a bowling perspective, right? Including himself. Is this the best bowling group you've provided to a World Cup or T20 World Cup ever? Because I look at the previous Sri Lanka ones, and obviously you've had greats like Murali, and you've had uh, 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 names are escaping me now, but anyway. And I look at this team, and I look at the options, the skill, the also the mystery in all of it, and I'm just scared because I don't like. I think you can feel different variations of this group, and you'll still be very successful. And is that where Sri Lanka is going in terms of their game plan? We've got a great bowling attack. We can restrict teams to manageable levels that will nullify the lack of the power hitting that we may not have.
So when I hear about conditions that might favor the bowlers, I think as a Sri Lankan fan, that is the best thing that can happen, because if you look at over the years, Sri Lanka has always had a lot of variety in their bowling attacks, and bowling has always been their strength, right? To your question of whether this is the best we've fielded at a World Cup, I wouldn't say it's the best. Possibly at a T20 World Cup, it might be the best. Um, why I say that is because a lot of these players are still new. Like if you talk about Matisha Patirana, he's proven in the IPL that he's a very good bowler, and currently I think amongst the top bowlers in the world. Dilshan Madhusanka is another one who has a lot of promise and has had shown us glimpses of what he can do. Nuwan Tushara, he's not as young as the other two, but he's certainly young in his career, right? So you've got a lot of inexperience in that bowling attack. But I think in terms of variety and what each of those bowlers have to offer, I think of the 7 bowlers, Sri Lanka has, I would say, probably among the top 3 to 4 bowling attacks in this tournament as a whole, uh, just on what they're capable of, each of those bowlers. So that is definitely the major plan that Sri Lanka would have, is to utilize those bowlers as best as possible because of the issue with the power hitting. And like I mentioned before, we are not expecting it to be a very high scoring tournament, and that could play right into their hands, right? When you've got 6, 7 options. I think if you look at the 15 who have been picked, 3 of them don't bowl. So that's Kusal Mendis, Pathum Nisanka, and Sadira Samaravikrama don't bowl. And 12 of them are bowling options, right? You've got guys like Asalanka who are very much part time, but you have the option of throwing them the ball at any given time of a game. So definitely, I think that's going to be a major part of Sri Lanka's. If they are to succeed, I think it will be on the back of the bowling attack.
Yeah, the complete opposite in what me and Mpho think will be successful from a South African perspective. All our money is on the batters and our top 6. So it's gonna be a good battle. It's gonna be a good battle. What role does Andrew Matthews have now in the side? Is his position just as a batter to get as many as a sort of pinch hitter role? Is he going to bowl? I know he hasn't been bowling an awful lot because of his recent injuries. So what is his role within the side at the moment?
Yeah, he's definitely coming in as an all-round option. I think the reason why he was brought back into the side is because of the fact that um, the management felt like the lack of experience at big tournaments like the World Cup was hurting Sri Lanka, and that's why they weren't able to progress beyond the group stages. So they feel like it's valuable to have a guy of Matthews's caliber, of his experience in the lineup. Um, he has been brought in as a kind of a middle order basher. I know that's not typically what he's done in the past or what he's been successful in the past, but what we've seen from him in his comeback is that that the intent seems to have really increased. He's had a couple of innings where he scored 30 20s, 30s really quickly. So I think that will be the role for him in that middle order, whether it's at number 5, 6, or 7. And then with the ball, actually, I think he has a massive role to play, and they're looking at that as a major role for him, in that he will probably take the new ball, or at least bowl in the power play overs where he's been actually relatively successful. He has an economy of less than 7 runs and over, I believe, and uh, gotten more than 10 to 15 wickets in that last 2 year period. So he's had a bit of success with the new ball. Of course, as an opposition batter, i- it would probably be a lot scarier to face someone like Dilshan Madhushankar or Dushmantha Chamira, or someone who is a lot quicker. Matthews has seen success, but again, Sri Lanka hasn't really played any of the favorites, or the teams that people are backing to win this tournament in the recent past. So all his success has come against not to diminish these teams, but the likes of Bangladesh and Afghanistan, who aren't really seen as semi-finalists of this tournament. So that will be the big challenge, to see if he can replicate that kind of success against teams that are a lot more uh, powerful at the top of the order, teams that will show that intent at the top of the order to go after the bowling. But his role will definitely be on both ends, where he's looked at as a middle order kind of basher and finisher, and also to bowl a couple of overs with the new ball.
And that's actually
Interesting.
quite, yeah, it is quite interesting, because there's a world where you look at that Sri Lankan team and you can see it's you kind of feel like there's a movement slightly away from Angelo Matthews, but he's still quite important in the side, even though there's a plentiful all-rounders who can do the job. But my question then comes to the batting, right? So it looks light at the top order with Nisanka, Kusal Mendes. We've watched Kusal Mendes in SA20, and he has the ability to strike at very high strike rates. It looks like this might be a World Cup where you have to take advantage of the power play. We watched the game against the Netherlands the other day, where it didn't go so well for the top order, and the middle order tried to shoulder as much, but they still couldn't get to a target of 181. What's the thinking around the batting for Sri Lanka, and how do they see themselves getting to even targets like 181, middle of the road, maybe not the 200s, but what do you think is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you're right when you say that, that for 6 overs, the power play is going to be critical. And Kusal Mendes is, I think, probably going to be the key wicket opposition will be looking at, because he's the guy who can go off at the top of the order. We've seen Nisanka play a lot of big innings, but he isn't necessarily known for being a big hitter at the top of the order, or at least early in his innings, right? So Kusal Mendes will be the guy who they look to for that kind of impetus. I think the top 7 to 8 are more or less settled for Sri Lanka. You could have a couple of changes, maybe at that number 3 and number 4 position, but they will be looking for that quick start at the top, and also guys like Hasaranga, Shanaka, Matthews to provide that ending, a big ending with the bat. It's going to be tricky. I think going into the USA, a lot of the conditions are going to be really unfamiliar, particularly where South Africa and Sri Lanka play, right? I don't think any international cricket has been played there. And drop-in pitches could behave not in the way that they are intended to. I'm sure a lot of them are being brought in the hope that they will produce a lot of runs, but there is a possibility that they might be a little slower. um, so in that case, Sri Lanka will be looking at that 180 as a mark to get at, and that will depend, I think, largely on Kusal Mendes and how he goes at the top of the order.
Yeah, interesting. The other two that excite me, and actually, I think I certainly mentioned Patharada the last time we spoke, but also Thashara. They really excite me. I think that from a fast bowling point of view, Sri Lanka has got a really good two youngsters there. They've got a bright future. Um, have they got a set role within this 11? Is the Sri Lankan public as excited about those two as I am? Um, Taking a little bit of shine off the spin dominance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at Sri Lanka's fast bowling, actually over the last two T20 World Cups, they've actually come along really well. You've got guys like Lahiro Kumara who have performed, people like Asita Fernando, Kasun Rajita who have come into this team as like the sixth, seventh options and still done reasonably well at big tournaments. So the depth has always kind of been there over the last 3 to 4 years. This is the first tournament where everyone is fit. I think that is what excites most of the fans back home. It's the first time we're going to see Chamira, Madhushankar, Patirana, and Tushara all available to be picked. And that kind of gives Sri Lanka so many options in terms of combinations. I know a lot of people think that Patirana and Tushara are kind of the same bowler because they have similar slinging actions, but they actually, I mean, their roles are quite different. If I was to take Tushara is a guy who can move the ball and get some really good shape into the batters, into the right-handers. So he's kind of forte is bowling with the new ball and bowling in that power play, right? And if you guys watch the IPL as well, that was his
Mm,
kind of role. He did bowl an over at the death, but he was used up top, particularly when there was movement. Pathirana is the opposite. He is the kind of guy who you don't bowl in the power play or when the ball is new. Most likely, he's bowling one over in that first 10 and then coming in maybe in the middle overs and bowling two at the death. So they're very different. I wonder if actually Sri Lanka will go for both of them because as it stands, it looks like they will go with seven batters, Hasaranga, and then three specialist bowlers, which in which case it'll leave room for only two quicks. Um, but it would be, I mean, I would be really excited to see both Tushara and Patirana bowl together, particularly because both of them have been in some kind of form coming into this tournament. I mean, Patirana has had his days where he's been wavered and, hasn't been able to find a good line and length. But over the course of the IPL, we saw how he's kind of um, gotten his radar a lot better. So I would be
mm.
excited to see the pair of them bowling together, but I don't think, at least at the beginning of the tournament, I doubt whether that will happen.
Okay,
Fair,
that's
fair enough. Yeah.
yeah. So I think the one key thing for me, I think for Sri Lanka going into this tournament is the form of one Indu Hasaranga. You need him to be the world's best bowler again in order for Sri Lanka to make inroads into this World Cup and cause a lot of upsets. How's he going? He hasn't had the greatest time since the last World Cup where he came on the scene and we kind of thought, okay, this progression should be linear, but in life nothing is linear. How's he doing, and how's the captaincy helping him grow as a cricketer?
Yeah, he has had a lot of injuries since the last World Cup. So he's been recovering from a heel injury. He's had a couple of other issues as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes with the ball. Um, he's I think captaincy is something that some guys enjoy and
Mm,
some guys don't. I think Hasaranga definitely falls into the first category. He's someone who likes that responsibility and likes having that that freedom to bowl when he wants, push himself up the order with when he's batting, and kind of have that um, aggression embodied in his team as well. So I think he's for the little time he's been doing it, he's really enjoyed it. I I personally think his batting might actually be more important to Sri Lanka in this tournament than his bowling. Not to say that his bowling doesn't matter, but it's just that in the bowling side of things, Sri Lanka do have, he's going to have three or four other bowlers who will be at his level or close to his level, right? But in the batting, he's going to have a huge role to play, particularly if he's going to use himself in that middle order, push himself up at number three or number four. Then that adding impetus to that innings is something he has taken upon himself over these last couple of months. So I think he'll be critical as a bet, but Sri Lanka will need him to be that genuine, like complete all rounder in this tournament if they are to succeed.
Interesting. I'm glad you actually said that his importance with the bat, because I agree. I think it is going to be important. That does make me think of the other spinner that I've been a fan of since he's under 19 days. A very, very mature individual is is it Willalake? Is it how you pronounce it?
It's Vellalage.
Willalake. Apologies. I've always liked him. I've always thought he was a very mature individual, far more mature than his age suggested. I thought he was ahead of his time when I first saw him. So with Hasaranga getting that extra influence and extra importance with the bat, that means that he has to come into his fore and do his business with the spin. I haven't seen him of late. I didn't see him in those recent series you talk about against Bangladesh and Zimbabwe. We didn't get that. But how has he been doing? Is he in form? Is he doing well? And what are your hopes for him in the tournament?
Yeah, he hasn't had any much international cricket of late. Like I mentioned, he's yet to make his T20 debut. So if he does play, that will be his first international in T20s for Sri Lanka. He's the type of guy, I think, um, who a lot of people, at first glance would underestimate, right? Because he does look like a bit of a bits and pieces kind of cricketer. He bowls a bit, he bats a bit, he's a good fielder. But it seems like every opportunity that he's got, he's performed well. And I think that's what kind of people find um, endearing about him, and that's why a lot of people kind of rate him or at least outside Sri Lanka rate him, is because of that anytime he's been given an opportunity, he's done really well. We saw last year in the Asia Cup when I think he got 5 wickets for not many runs against India. It was an ODI competition, of course, but against one of the best batting lineups in the world, right? Similarly, when he made his debut in a tour when Australia was in Sri Lanka, he did really well with the ball and the bat there as well. So I think he will have a role to play, particularly when the games move. If Sri Lanka makes it through to the Super 8s and they move to the West Indies, where again pitches are expected to be a lot better for the spinners. I'd be curious to see where he slots into the side, because you'd have to say that he probably comes in place of one of the fast bowling all rounders in Shanaka or Matthews. So I'd be interested to see where he comes in, but I do think that he'll have a role to play, particularly if the conditions are really suitable for spinners.
That's really good. Just we don't want to see him on Monday night. Uh, um, but yeah, so what's the expectation in Sri Lanka for this team? Is it to get into the Super 8? Is it semi-finals? What's the expectation that you have for this team coming into this World Cup?
To be honest, I think Super 8s is probably where if you look at them as a team, that's probably where they should end up. Because like I've mentioned before, the power hitting, and there are some gaps to fill in that team, right? But at the same time, if things go well, if the bowling attack is able to stay injury free, I think they could cause a few difficult situations for some of the top teams in the tournament, and maybe be pushing for a spot in the semi-final. The thing is, they if they do make it into the Super 8s, right, they fall into the group that has India and Australia and New Zealand. So it's not going to be easy. Of course, coming into the tournament, Australia and India probably two of the favorites, right, to go all the way. So it's not going to be easy, but I do think if the bowling can click, and the conditions can play its part as well, that they could be a really dangerous side in that Super 8 stage of the tournament.
That's actually
Interesting.
quite yes, especially that Super 8 log, because that would be something else. But I do think Sri Lanka can cause an upset against those teams. It's just obviously the question is the strength of the batting.
Yes. I was going to ask sort of, you've really answered it, really. You've really answered the strengths and weaknesses. We kind of know where that is. It's the opposite of South Africa. What do you think about the role of Akib Javed joining the team as a bowling coach? We've also got outside individuals joining our setup. Obviously, a man who's gone on to win the World Cup with Pakistan. So, what do you think of his importance of giving his experience to a young, fast bowling unit of Sri Lanka's and the influence that he could have on their performances in this World Cup?
Yeah, obviously he hasn't had a lot of time to work with the bowlers because, like I mentioned, 6 of the 7 were picked in the IPL, and the guys who didn't go were in injury recovery, right? So he hasn't had a lot of time to work with him. I think his biggest role will probably be on the strategy side because he's obviously coached some franchise cricket at the PSL. So he's got that kind of background behind him. So he's the strategic side of things is probably where he will contribute, because like I mentioned before, this although on paper this bowling attack is really good, they haven't played together, right? So defining roles and who's going to do what is going to be really important, and I think that'll be a major role for the coaching staff as well, deciding who's going to bowl in the power play, who do you want to bowl at the death with Patirana, middle overs, who are you looking to get you those wickets. So all those things will come into play, and I think with his experience coaching a lot of T20 sides, I think he'll be able to add in terms of strategy to the bowling lineup.
So,
Interesting.
outside of the game against South Africa, right? We in a group with Nepal, Netherlands, and Bangladesh. What's your expectation around those games in terms of Sri Lanka? Is it you expect them to win? And I ask this in the context of obviously what's happened in previous years where associate nations have, even for South Africa, have caused us a whole lot of drama. So what's your thinking around the other opponents in the group?
Yeah, I mean, if you saw the warm-ups, Sri Lanka couldn't get 181 against the Netherlands. Of course, it's not the same as playing in the tournament, but it's also a bit of a reality check on how good associate countries are, right? And they're coming in with some game time behind them. I believe they were part of Tri Nations with Ireland and somebody else, Scotland, I think, right? So they're coming in with some game time under their belt. Sri Lanka haven't played any international cricket in the last couple of months. At the same time, Nepal is another team who have been growing. They have a massive following back home. They're coming in with a lot of hopes. I think their batting lineup is one that that could cause some upsets in that group. And Bangladesh, Sri Lanka's, I don't want to say rival, but we've had a couple of tight games with them in the recent past, right? So it's not going to be easy, but I do expect Sri Lanka to get through those 3 games, and get through to the Super 8s, just banking on the fact that that bowling attack is going to trouble some of the associate countries who haven't really faced that type of bowling before, right? Which is what Sri Lanka has kind of done really well in the last 2 tournaments, where they've played that little qualifier stage of the tournament before the proper tournament starts. So that they don't want to underestimate those teams because they've all got match winners who can turn games on their heads. Bangladesh in these conditions are also going to be, I think, a dangerous side, but I do expect them to win all 3 games.
It's exactly what I said on our previous podcast. Mpho said, "What are we going to do against teams other than Sri Lanka?" I said, "Win all 3." I don't know if that's true, but I said exactly
But are
the
you guys
same
sure
thing.
about the Netherlands?
Oh,
I said
well,
it.
they
I
beat
said we'd beat
you.
them. I
They
said
beat
we
you,
would
and
beat
if you beat us on Monday, it could be a drama. But I expect drama because whenever South Africa plays in a tournament, there's always going to be a dramatic game. I just think that dramatic game is going to be Nepal, when everyone's
Mm.
going to be like, "Where's this country in the world,
Yeah.
and how are they causing us problems?" But speaking of our game, where do you so kind of what do you think the 11 for Sri Lanka is going to look like? And on what and who's the player that you think will cause South Africa the most problems?
Yeah, I mean, if I go to the 11, I I think Sri Lanka will go with obviously Mendes and Nisanka at the top, and then you
Mm,
have Kamindo Mendes at number 3. Uh, Probably Sadira Samaravikrama or Dhananjaya De Silva at number 4. And then you've got Matthews, Shanaka, Vanindu Hasaranga, Mahis Deekshana, Chamira, and Matisha Patirana, probably. But of course, like that fast bowling unit, we don't know. It could be somebody else partnering Matisha Patirana. I just went with Chamira because he is the most experienced one out of the 4, right? And
mm,
he's got skills to bowl in all 3 kind of phases of the game. But there could be a couple of changes. But I think apart from that, it's just the middle order, that number 4, that might change, where Dhananjay De Silva or Sadira might come in. Otherwise, it looks a pretty settled 11. Um, I would actually think Hasaranga will be the guy who does trouble the South Africans with his spin. I know Klaassen's had a brilliant 12 to 14 months. He just takes apart all the spinners, but Hasaranga also kind of comes with experience, right? And he's got
mm.
a couple of World Cups under his belt now. He isn't kind of a newbie. He knows how to bowl to attacking batters. And I think he also prefers it when the team is attacking him, because that gives him more opportunities to take wickets. So against South Africa, against kind of the most explosive batting lineup, I would say, in the tournament, it'd probably be someone like Hasaranga, who has a huge role to play.
Okay.
And who are you most frightened of from a South African perspective? Um, yeah, who's he is most aware of from a South African perspective that Sri Lanka need to
That
make sure that
man.
they don't do well?
Yeah, so the thing is, everyone's talking about Klaassen, right? But to get to Klaassen, you have to get through De Kock, and I think, would it be Reza Hendricks at the top,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Sri Lanka have historically had trouble with both of them, who've got runs against them. So I think De Kock is going to be a big one, big wicket for Sri Lanka.
Mm,
They do need to get him out early. But of course, that top 6 or top 7 looks really dangerous. If Sri Lanka win the toss, I think they would want South Africa to chase and put them under as much pressure as possible. But I think for both teams, it's a funny one, because I think both teams would rather have played each other later on in the tournament instead of the first game, where they've kind of had a measure of the conditions and how the teams are going and how the group is going before they face the 2 top seeded teams in the tournament. But that's not how things have worked out. So I expect things to be a bit tentative, but De Kock's wicket up top, I think, is going to be really important, just to set the tone for Sri Lanka, in like coming up against an explosive batting lineup like that.
yeah. Look, I think for us, we want that middle order to be as destructive as possible. The Klaassen, Miller, Stubbs,
Mm.
maybe even Markram there. I remember the last time when Sri Lanka, probably pre-COVID, when Markram was captain, and we're preparing for the last World Cup or whatever it is, or we're preparing for a one-day World Cup, but no, I get it wrong. It wasn't 2019. It was actually post-COVID, around about 21, and Markram and Reza and De Kock were just going crazy.
Mm.
It was like the first times we thought, okay, Aiden can play T20 cricket. So it's going to be quite interesting. Estelle, do you have any questions for us in terms of this game before we go to what you think might happen on Monday?
Yeah, I mean, I asked you guys before we started recording, right? Like,
Mm,
are you confident about South Africa's chances at the tournament? Because a lot of people are, pegging them as one of the favorites, right? And also, You guys said no. And why is that? Why
Okay,
aren't you
I'll start.
confident?
Look, I think my thing is this. I think we have a batting lineup that should win a World Cup. We have a bowling lineup that's average. It's not going to be the best, contrary to other World Cups where it was the bowling that led. We've got a lot of injuries when it comes to bowling, so it's going to be quite interesting to see how we manage that, and we could concede a lot of runs. And Sri Lanka is the first test for us to see how they manage that, because when we looked at that West Indies series, most of the bowlers were available, and they didn't do well. But there were injuries, so we're just wanting to see what team. And there's an inter squad game happening today, but we all can't watch it. So yeah. However, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in form can take the World Cup from anybody. And I said this in the SA20 about Heino Klaasen, that you can't write off any team that Heino Klaasen is a part of up until he's out of the his wicket has been taken. And to a certain extent, that thread, I think, gives me a little bit of hope, because I know if Heino Klaasen is still available to bat, we can do anything. We can compete with the best. But it's been a long IPL. We don't know how he feels. They just arrived 2 days ago. What type of game plan the South Africans are trying to play, we don't know. But it's mostly prevalent on Stubbs, Markram, Klaasen, and Miller actually being the best batters in the world. And if one of them can be the best batter in the world, there's no reason why we can't be in a World Cup final. The only problem is, can we get a fit bowling attack that can help these guys at least? And so my worry is, with Sri Lanka being the first up, your bowlers are really good. You've got some really skillful bowlers, and it's one thing that this batting lineup can fall to is some really skillful bowling, some really skillful spin bowling, like Hasaranga, like Tikshana. And so I'm worried about that more, just because they're not prepared yet. They're gonna beat everyone else, but it's just this game that's important. I'm just worried that it's the first game of the World Cup. And I've loved the Nepal. I actually would have loved Netherlands. Just get it out the way. But that's me. Tim?
Yeah, look, outside media have rightly given us praise for our top 6. I genuinely think it is arguably the best in the world right now. But they haven't really focused on the bowling. And that's where the problem is, as Paul pointed out. You've got a really out of form Nokia. You've got a Rabada, who's a world-class bowler, but this is not his best format, and he's also got a slight niggle. You've got an inconsistent Shamsi. It's not an expensive Joel Coetzee. It's not a great bowling lineup. It really isn't. It's a problematic one where that top 6 has to come off 90% of the time. That's a problem. That is a huge, huge problem. When you've got Klaasen and Miller and Markram and de Kock have to come off every single time on pitches that we've been told over and over again are not going to give you 200. Whereas I think we need that. I think we need 185 minimum with that bowling, the problems with that bowling lineup. So I think I'd be surprised if we made the final. Right now, as things stand now, I'd be very surprised if we made the final. Very happy, but I'd be very surprised. I just don't think we have the bowling lineup to do it.
I'd also be very surprised if we got out the Super 8. I honestly think that's where it's going to come unstuck. When you play better teams with batting lineups who aren't as great as yours, but bowling lineups. Like, for instance, if you look at an Australia, you can't, like, how do you handle a Mitchell Starc? If Mitchell Starc takes 3 wickets up top, we are probably going to be hanging around 160, 170. Our bowlers can't defend that. It would take a monumental effort from even that bowling lineup. And then our spinners, Tim hasn't spoken about our spinners. I like Keshav in this format is an economy rate guy, not a not a wicket taker, right? And so the question is, we're going to need him to take, especially when we move to the West Indies. When we move to the West Indies, we need spinners, and I don't think we've got the right complement. I think we've got the best spinners in South Africa, but they're there to complement the fast bowling. It's not there for them to lead. And unlike Sri Lanka, where Mahesh Dikshana can lead you into a victory, Hasaranga can lead you into a victory. That hasn't happened with Shamsi over the past couple of years, and hasn't happened with Keshav, right? And so for me, that's the 50-50. But it is T20, so anything can happen, which is why I like the composition of Sri Lanka, because I look there and I'm like, they, outside of necessarily having the power hitting, if it's going to be slower and lower, the runs are not going to be the issue. It's your ability to be able to defend totals that's going to be what wins you the World Cup. And Sri Lanka have quite a lot. So yeah, Estelle, we're playing in New York on Monday. What are you worried about? Are you worried about the new pitch and the stadium and everything else? You know, because it is a drop-in pitch. I don't think both of us play on drop-in pitches in our country, so it's going to be a learning. And do you think that the bowling lineup have it, and the team have the ability to adapt?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that could happen for Sri Lanka is if that pitch is slow, right? The worst thing is if it's a flat pitch, because you know, despite the bowling attack that Sri Lanka has, coming up against an informed South African batting lineup is probably not going to be easy. So I think a lot will depend on the conditions. I do think, you know, adapting to the conditions shouldn't be too much of an issue, particularly as I mentioned, if it's a bit on the slower side. What I've heard is from even the MLC, where they've used drop-in pitches, they've brought in the pitchers from places like Australia in the hopes that they'll be quicker. But that hasn't always been the case. So, you know, I'd be actually more curious to see what the captain who wins the toss does, because neither team is going to be sure of what's going to happen, right?
Yes.
But I do think it'll be a massive opportunity for Sri Lanka, who, I mean, a lot of people aren't rating, right? At this point, people are, they're talking about the bowling attack, but a lot of people aren't really rating them as a possibility to make it to the semis or whatever. So if they can get one over South Africa, I think that will be a massive kind of statement, and would probably give them a huge amount of confidence also, going forward in the tournament.
Yes. Yeah, so we got a few comments from our viewers on YouTube. Dan De Castro echoes our sentiments. Estelle smart, insightful, and stunningly gorgeous too. Thank you very much. We agree. And there's one from NY Times Square around. He says, I can say no team is guaranteed that they are confident with their bowling. Every team has a weak bowling besides Australia. And I agree with that. I think everyone's lent towards the batting a lot more, which is why Sri Lanka is slightly different, because you've got options. And my thing for Monday is, if it's slow and low, you can pull out not part-time spinners, but very good spinners, right? That can cause problems. Whereas we've only got Reza Hendricks and Aiden Markham. If we need to have like 14 or 15 overs of spin, right? And I think that's gonna work in that might work in Sri Lanka's favor, because I think both teams are going into the unknown on Monday with this pitch. And so yeah. But outside of that, Estelle, I just want to wish you all the best for your team. Hope to see you in the Super 8. Hope to see ourselves in the Super 8. But I want to say thank you very much for joining us. And I know the prediction for Monday is Sri Lanka wins. And I know you said it would be Wanindo Hasaranga. Is it with the bat or with the ball?
I think he's going to have a good all-round game. He's coming in with a lot of confidence with the bat as well. So,
yeah. Okay. Estelle, thank you very much. Really appreciated for you joining us. all the best in the tournament. We hope to speak again, and the next time we speak again might be in the final. So hopefully that'll be a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, guys. It's been great to chat with you.
Thank you very much, Estelle. Have a great day.
Thanks, Estelle.
Cheers. Tim, you heard it there. That's Sri Lanka. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen on Monday. We're going to arrive there. Everyone's going to look at the pitch, and team composition is going to be team composition. And I think this might work in Sri Lanka's favor. They could sneak this one, but don't write off that I call them the destruction boys, that middle order, that Stubbs, Klaassen, and Miller trio. They could be a game changer for this World Cup for us. Slow starts no more, in my eyes, and very strong finishes. But yeah, Sri Lanka and their bowling is going to be something else. I think it's going to be an issue for us.
It actually doesn't matter what the pitch is, because it's going to be our top six versus their spinners. Whatever the pitch says, whatever the pitch conditions are, that is where the battle is going to be won or lost. Look, if we want to win a World Cup, we're going to win this game. I
Yes.
really do believe that. If we want to win a World Cup, this is the sort of fixture that we have to win. If we were playing a team like Nepal first out and we happen to have a shock loss, it would be a shock. It would be front page news and everything and all of that. But there would still be that feeling of, well, you've got the rest of the tournament to play, and you should still go through to the next
Make
round.
the Super 8, yes.
Yeah, expect the Super 8s. If you lose to a team like Sri Lanka, it adds double the pressure when you face somebody like Nepal. So we have to win, and that's it. That's all.
Okay, you heard it from Tim here. We have to beat Sri Lanka. We have to win in the Nassau County Stadium in New York. First time international cricket is going to be played in New York, so that's going to be quite exciting for everybody. And yeah, outside of that, enjoy the first game of the World Cup. It's USA versus Canada. I'm not waking up to watch that. Sorry. Outside of that, cheers, goodbye, and le sale kakahiso.